Welcome to All for One, your go-to series for all things vacation rentals. I'm Katie Bien.
And I'm Christy Conway, and together we have a combined 25 years of experience in the vacation rental industry. Join us weekly for short episodes packed with tips on growing your company and keeping up with today's trends.
Thanks for tuning in to All for One, because when it comes to success in this industry, we're all in it to win it together. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of All for One. We have a very special episode today. Today, we have an actual real-life homeowner here to join us. So oftentimes, we're trying to figure out, what does a homeowner need? How can we get in front of them? Well, we thought, why don't we go straight to the source? So today, here we have Sean, last name redacted for privacy. Sean has 5 vacation rental properties. He is a seasoned investor in the industry. Thank you so much, Sean, for being here with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Sean, just to start right out of the gate, really want to break down, what motivated you to invest in vacation rental property and, what you were looking for.
So I initially started looking at vacation rental property because I wanted a property as a home base, essentially, to expand my long-term rental portfolio into a new market. And at the same time, I initially wanted a log cabin. So I started actively looking for potential properties that I could use as a home base, as well as use as vacation rental when I'm not using it for expanding my long-term rental business. That was the initial view that got me started in it. What ended up being the reality was that I've only stayed in one of my properties, and I think I've stayed there twice in the 5 years that I've owned it. So my initial plan was to use it for expansion of another business, and ended up turning it purely into a short-term rental.
And so you are so savvy. You know how to run a business. Why is it that you decided on a property manager versus doing it yourself?
So I still have a day job that I really enjoy. And so I knew I couldn't be involved in the day-to-day minutia, essentially, of short-term rental management. For many years, I managed my long-term rentals myself until that got to a point where it was too much to manage both the day job and the long-term rentals. And the long-term rentals were the easiest thing to find a property manager to take over. And so when I was starting in short-term rentals, I was already at that mindset with the long-terms. I'd already transferred about half of them to professional property management. And so when I initially got started, I started with the view of utilizing a property management company. The one piece of short-term rentals that I don't have the time or desire to be involved in is the guest management side and the amount of communication there. And so for me, that was the most logical route to go.
Yeah, for sure. And the big question is, right, so you decided to go with a property manager. How did you find that property manager? So a lot of the property managers that Katie and I talk to, they do things like digital ads, Google search, they send postcards, they do cold email, their Instagram, all the social media. How did you actually find a property manager?
So I'm kind of in a unique situation in that I'm on my third property manager in less than 6 years. And as bad as that sounds, let me give you a little backstory behind it. When I originally started looking for property in this market, I had contacted a company that was essentially the only, or at least the largest, one that was probably the only one that was well established in that marketplace. Built a relationship with the ownership there and worked directly with them to kind of build a team in that marketplace. And they helped me with renovation resources and things of that sort. So my initial search was based on that relationship and kind of finding the key market player in that market. They were eventually bought out by a large operation. And shortly after that buyout, I transitioned to another small operator. And I spent a significant amount of due diligence interviewing, researching those small operators. I spent a lot of time looking at their properties, the reviews from their guests on how they manage their properties, going so far as to monitor and track their pricing methodologies and things. as well as quite a few lengthy interviews. I did not just pick a property manager at whim. I spent a lot of time and a lot of due diligence before I made the selection for the one that I'm with now.
That's
Cool.
interesting because we do see that is that a lot of homeowners, they will shop multiple property managers. Like you said, you didn't just go with somebody on a whim. You really did your research and you called each one that you knew of in your area. So, and you probably more than somebody who's just getting into the industry or somebody that has a second home that they're just, starting to step into turning it into a vacation rental, you know what questions to ask. And so not only is this valuable for people who are listening that are property managers, but maybe even new homeowners. What are the right questions to ask? And what did you find were the most important things to learn about and to ask those property management companies to help you in your decision?
I actually wrote out a very, very long list of essentially interview questions or criteria that I was looking for. A lot of it is more around mindset.
Mm.
After having just been transitioned to a large property management company, I was very focused around the theory and philosophy behind like how were they managing occupancy versus quality.
Mm.
There was one particular property management company that I interviewed that was all about driving profit. They were going to guarantee me the most revenue of any property management company. And so when I did some research on this particular company, and I looked at their website and their bookings, oftentimes that you could rent a very nice property of theirs for significantly less than a budget hotel room in the same market because they were just trying to drive occupancy. And that was something that I was very leery of, was trying to stay away from. So when I say mindset, I'm thinking about how do they value the properties, where they sit on priorities as far as cleanliness, right? If your units are constantly booked, there's no time other than just doing quick turnover cleanings. They were constantly getting bad reviews for cleanliness and things like that. Other major considerations were contract. I had very specific contract language that I was not going to sign. In addition to that, I looked at the fairness of a contract, whether it was focused around being mutually agreeable or if it was very heavy on the terms and conditions that were disfavorable to the owner. One example I can give you there is the indemnity language that many property managers use as a boilerplate. Some of them are more aggressive than others. One of them went so far as to say that the homeowner is responsible for any and all liability, indemnifies the property manager up to and including negligence on the behalf of the property manager or the property manager's employees. And so to me, that was a pretty significant deal breaker.
And I, as a former BD person, I know that language very, very well. And Sean, you are definitely an investor persona, and you are the exact person I love to interview me because that challenged me to make sure that I knew everything about my company, everything about that contract. So my burning question right now is, are you a contract attorney?
I, I am not a contract
Okay.
attorney. As a matter of fact, my day job is in the construction industry.
Okay.
And so anything in the construction industry is contract heavy. And so that's
Okay.
why
Yep.
I'm very focused on the contract side.
I always got so excited when I got an attorney to sign our contract, right? Ours was 17 pages long. So you and I would have gone back for quite a while with a lot of strikes, a little bit of red here and there, all good. But anytime I would get an attorney to sign, I'd go upstairs to my boss and be like, I did it. I got an attorney to sign this contract. But it's good, right? It's good that you're doing your due diligence because what happens is different personas just sign and they don't know what they're signing, and then they come back to you and they're confused, and then that's what ruins a relationship. So it's good that you're forthcoming, you know what you want, you know what you don't want. And honestly, people like us in our when I was in my property management days, I preferred people like you that knew what was happening. If X happened, Y is going to happen next. So there was no confusion. The other thing I would say too, when I used to deal with investors, it's a whole different form of communication, right? Like you've got this second job, you've got 5 properties, you don't have time to talk to me all day. So the next question would be, what type of communication do you prefer from your property manager? Is it a phone call? Is it a text? Is it an email? What makes you most comfortable and how do you want to be communicated with?
So I probably am on a far side of the spectrum on this. I like to be in the loop. I like to know what's going
Okay.
on. If there are challenges at my properties, I want to know. I'm a very level-headed individual, so I understand why some property managers are leery to tell their homeowners when bad things are happening. But I'd rather know than be blindsided by it. As far as communication method, um, text, call, email. Generally, if it's urgent, I need a text or an email, or a text or a phone call, not an email.
Okay.
I personally renovated all of my short-term rentals, so I
Mhm.
know them inside and out. And oftentimes, if there's a maintenance-related issue, I can talk somebody through some troubleshooting steps that'll often um, get a resolution faster than having to wait for somebody to be dispatched. You know, one example I can think of is a hot water heater. I had guest complains no hot water. Maintenance person goes out, does the obvious thing, checks the breaker, and breaker's fine. But then called me and was like, "Hey, here's what's going on at your property." And I said, "Oh, we'll try this. Take off the panel. There's a reset button in there. Reset it. See if that fixes it." And sure enough, it did. And so instead of having to wait for a plumber who um, could have potentially been hours away, I've got a quick response, and guest satisfaction is significantly higher because they just gave me a quick phone call and I was able to walk them through it over the phone. The one piece of communication that I don't want to be involved in is the day-to-day guest communication. And so when I picked a property manager, I picked one that I had a high level of confidence in their customer service abilities to be able to have that communication, have the tough conversations when customers were upset, and still be able to drive positive reviews without me having to get involved in that piece of it. One of the things that was incredibly important to me on the communication side was less about how they communicated with me and more about the level of access that I had.
Mm.
And by that, I mean, if I text one of the more senior people of the property management company at 8 o'clock at night, do they respond to me? Right. I didn't want to be in a situation where if I had an issue, I was told to call an 800 number and take a message and they'll get back to me in 3 to 5 business days. It was very important to me to be able to have direct access to the decision makers who were responsible for my properties.
I still have a couple friends that work in property management, and it's so funny because we were at a softball game just yesterday, and she literally has 2 phones, and it's like she's like, "Oh, I'm on call." So, and the owners have access and the guests have access. So, that's something too that's super important that especially new property managers need to think about. Who's answering your phone after hours? Is there someone that's doing that? Is it something you can pass along? And then just the last thing I was thinking about when you were talking about it, what was really important to a lot of investors for us was if there was like any type of insurance, any guest insurance, who is paying that? How much are they covered up to? Because where I'm at in my area, I mean, we have properties right on the ocean. So, I mean, you're talking about $4 million houses. And if somebody destroys it, 500 bucks ain't going to cover to fix it.
The insurance piece of it, both from a who's responsible for the property as a whole, as well as who is responsible for damages and who is responsible for liability. The liability piece is a huge component. And while liability claims in this industry are relatively rare, they have the potential to be catastrophic. And so making sure that the contract outlines who's responsible for what, and making sure that that's split mutually in some respects, or it's clearly outlined so whichever party is responsible fully understands and owns that.
Now I've got to know, and I think I already know the answer to this because all good attorneys ask, what do the guests sign for their liability, right? So you have to make sure, if somebody books direct, you have to have a good guest lease as well, right? Because if they trip and fall because the air was thick, right? That's not your fault. That's not the property manager's fault. That's their freaking fault for not being able to walk properly. So it's
Yeah,
good to
that's
make sure, especially if somebody has a pool or a hot tub, anybody that had water around them, they would have to sign something that would say, hey, if something happens, there's no lifeguard on duty. You are responsible for that. So it's good to have that all up front. And that's great. You do your due diligence because other people just aren't going to think about that kind of stuff.
I did go with a property manager who does have a guest contract that every guest has to sign,
Yeah.
as well as some identity steps that are taken, especially when they're booking through either direct or even through some of the larger national websites.
All right, Sean. So, what advice would you give to a property manager based on your experience? What can they do to highlight themselves to not only build that confidence in you handing over your properties to them, but also to maintain and retain that relationship going forward?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So from the initial onset, and things that were important were presence in the marketplace, right? You don't want I didn't want a situation where I was only listed on Airbnb or something like that. I wanted a situation where my property was listed both, or I say both, but among multiple major websites, as well as having a direct booking site with pretty good search results, right? It doesn't need to be the top one on Google, but somewhere in the top grouping. The current property manager that I'm with, when I brought my properties on, I was going to be creating a second page on their site for listings, and I didn't want to be on the second page. So one of the things that they were able to do was to make their listings random. So when you go to their website today, it'll be in a certain order. When you go to their website tomorrow, it'll be in a different order, kind of thing. So that kind of visibility for my properties. As far as the confidence side of it, I really heavily focused on guest reviews, specifically guest reviews around interactions. Talked with them about their strategy around guest satisfaction, around what kind of communication they did with the guests, so I understood exactly what the guest experience was like. So basically, I went all but one step shy of just renting one of their units to try it out, and I'm not opposed to that. I think that's a fair move if someone is interviewing a property manager to rent one of their units and find out what their guest experience is like.
That's great. And along those lines too, of like, what advice would you give a homeowner who's shopping for a property manager? Let's say what top three questions should they ask? Because I remember when I would talk to homeowners, a lot of times the first question they would ask is, how much money can you make me and what's your commission? But there's so many questions they don't know to ask, right? Of like guest fees and like you just mentioned, how are they listed? Is it just on Airbnb? What top three questions would you recommend that a homeowner ask to really get a better picture of the property manager?
So to me, the fees conversation was always last. I wanted to decide whether I was going to work with this company or not, regardless of what their fee structure was.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it was more about marketing strategy, guest satisfaction strategy, and contract.
Mm-hmm.
The contract to me is more important than the fees side. So in that order, right? Guest satisfaction, marketing strategy, and how you're going to get bookings, and then third, contract. After that would be the pricing discussion. And I will say I'm very sensitive to pricing discussions because of some of the strategies that I've seen deployed that I think are deceptive.
Mm.
And so if I were an owner, I would only work with companies that are transparent about their entire fee structure. And when companies try to reserve the right to include additional fees and things, to me, that's a giant red flag. And I was burned by that with the transition to a large property management company. And oftentimes people can be lured by deceptively low commission rates, but not knowing that there's additional fees that are being charged to guests unless they've done their research, including but not limited to things like booking fees, pet fees that are per night, hot tub fees that are per night, cleaning fees that are well in excess of what it costs to clean a unit. Those are all things that benefit the property manager, but don't benefit the owner. And that goes back to that whole one-sided thing. I want it to be mutual. I want to understand and have transparency in what the costs are. And to me, having some sort of limitation to that and make sure that you outline it in the contract is incredibly important.
Don't forget the convenience fee.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's on the internet and it's much harder to book online than go in person. So
It's amazing to me. And I understand why they do that. And in many cases, the property managers, that's a marketing strategy to go in with aggressively low commissions, but then make it up on the back end. Ultimately, a property management company is a business, right? If they don't make enough money to stay in business, then they won't be. So again, both sides mutually beneficial. The property manager has to receive a decent commission in order to stay in operation. At the same time, I don't think that should be deceptive and in the form of nightly fees or booking fees or anything of that sort that is adjustable at a whim. I know one large national company is notorious for increasing their booking fee or their convenience fee or whatever they call it. And I have a friend who has had a unit with them who started with some reasonable fee structure, which was a reasonable commission plus a booking fee or convenience fee or whatever it was structured at. And ultimately, that fee increased. I think it was over 10% within the first 2 years that he had that property under management.
Yeah, that's not the experience that you want to have with your property manager. It feels almost kind of bait and switch like, right? To be able to
Absolutely.
not only get in, it's not about just getting the contract signed and getting that new homeowner in your program. It's about maintaining that relationship for the long run. And doing something like that, I would think definitely would harm that relationship.
One of my sticking points is maintenance as a profit center.
Mm.
And that's a big one for me. And the reason why it's a big one for me is because it disaligns priorities if the property manager is making profit on maintenance. And I know there's probably some property managers here cringing when they hear this, but if you're making profit on maintenance, you're essentially making profit at the expense of your homeowner. And to me, that's not a partnership.
Mm.
So I specifically picked a company that is transparent about maintenance expenses, maintenance costs, everything's passed through. There's not a markup on it, because if you're incentivized to call maintenance, especially outside vendors, then you're more inclined to do that than to try to troubleshoot it internally, or even to give the homeowner a call and say, hey, this is what's going on. What would you like me to do? So that's a real big sticking point for me.
I've talked to homeowners who they would rather pay a little bit of a larger commission, but like you said, not have that nickel and diming and upcharging.
Absolutely. And it goes back to my previous statement, right? You're not always best off going with whoever has the lowest commission. And that's not the route that I went. I did not go for the company that had the lowest commission. I went for the company that was transparent and was aligned with what was mutually beneficial, because ultimately the property manager has to make money or they won't be in business, right? You want the property manager to make a profit. That's the goal. You want to make a profit, you want the property manager to make a profit. What you don't want as a homeowner is the property manager to be making a profit off of you.
Mhm.
That's when the dynamic changes.
All right, Christy, what are some action items that a property manager can implement, especially when they're working with an investor?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, know the investor persona, right? Next, be transparent with your fees with an investor. They want to know where all of their money is going and what a guest is being charged. Know your contract inside and out, just in case an investor questions anything, you know how to answer it and know what you can change in your contract. Have multiple booking channels, not just a direct booking site. Also, have a guest experience mapped out so you can tell an investor what that guest experience looks like, what you guys are doing for the guest. And then, of course, establish what type of communication. Some investors are very deep into it and they want to know everything. And then you have an investor just text me every once in a while. So make sure you know that communication.
Sean, thank you so much for being here with us. This has been so insightful. I'm sure we're going to want to bring you back at some point to ask you more questions that come up. If anybody has any questions for Sean, let us know. We'll bring them back maybe in season 2. Thank you. Thank you again, Sean, for being here.
Thanks for having me. And if I can provide insight or if you get any follow-up questions on this, please, by all means, do reach out.
All right, everyone. This was the very last episode of season 1. Can you believe it?
No, we made it.
We made it. Our
Yes.
goal was 10 episodes in season 1. We'll probably take a small hiatus, get our act together for season 2, and return. So everyone keep an eye out. Join our LinkedIn page as well as following us on YouTube. Keep growing, keep succeeding, and until then, all for one. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.